welcome to today's episode of Sparks by the PRCA. This new series, hosted by the PRCA Equity and Inclusion Advisory Board, explores key issues across gender, age, LGBTQIA+, neurodiversity, and mental health. In this first episode, we're going to be diving into a quiet crisis that's been brewing in the PR and comms industry. Ageism doesn't often get talked about. My name is Angela Balakrishnan. I am Executive Director for Communications and Public Affairs at the Information Commissioner's Office, the UK's data protection regulator, and I also sit on the Women in PR committee. Women in PR is a network that exists to drive up the number and diversity of women in senior leadership roles across our industry. And we recently run a survey as part of our ongoing campaigning on ageism. It's a topic that consistently comes up with our members as a top concern. The latest results were really shocking. It showed that women are experiencing ageism even earlier, and it's hitting harder. So we did the survey first time round about 4 years ago, and one of the things that jumped out was that women are experiencing ageism from the age of 40 compared to 45 when it was done 4 years ago. And what's more, we're hearing from women that often ageism is colliding with issues such as race, neurodivergence, and health. And that's often linked to women's health or burnout and mental health. And it's absolutely driving an early exodus of women from our industry. To discuss these findings with me today and how the industry can tackle it, I'm delighted to be joined by Jo Carr, who is President of Women in PR and the co-founder and Chief Client Officer at Hope&Glory PR agency. Hi, Jo. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Such an important conversation for us to be having and long overdue.
Yeah, it doesn't really get talked about as much, does it, age? When we got these survey results through, I mean, the headline statistic just completely bowled me over. Our research found that 78% of women in communications and PR feel overlooked from the age of 40. I mean, I can relate to this. I've just hit 41, but I didn't really think in my career that this was the point where I would start to be feeling like I was kind of on the old pile. What was your reaction when you first saw those stats, as someone who's been, I guess, also watching this unfold up close?
Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, 40 is not old, as you said, nor is 41, Angela. But it does feel like another punch in the gut for women. I mean, we already have issues around maternity and pregnancy discrimination. We're already having to deal with the pay gap and disparity in how we're paid. Add to that things like the menopause, and it's a lot. Quite frankly, it's a lot for us to have to bear and to shoulder.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that it seems to be getting worse. When we last did the survey back in 2021, we had about 41% who felt they were experiencing ageism, in their 40s, and now that's gone up to 58, almost 60%. On the one hand, we're kind of seeing a lot of progressive practices being brought in, kind of a sense that the stuff is getting talked about, people are more aware of it, but the stats are sort of indicating that people are feeling that it's hitting them harder. Why do you think that is? And also, why is it that women feel ageism much earlier than men do?
I think there's a real intersectionality here in terms of I don't think it's an accident that from 40 at a time when perhaps women's the mental load is even greater for many women, right? You've got family, you might have caring responsibilities, you might be grappling with the perimenopause or early menopause. You've got all of that going on at a time when possibly employers are treating experience as if it has an expiry date. I think that's the really worrying thing. Like, experience should be valued and celebrated, and yet there seems to be this sense that to be relevant and fresh, you have to be young. But you can have great insights and brilliant ideas at any age. It doesn't have an expiry date. And I think there's two things going on. Perhaps women feeling a loss of confidence in their 40s because there's more than ever to juggle. That coincided with agencies or in-house departments or employers not perhaps seeing the value that age brings to the party.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This idea of like labels and putting people into boxes, that you to be fresh and full of ideas, you need to be young, and that, wisdom comes with age. I know we use that phrase a lot, but I guess we can be anything we want at any point in our lives, can't we? Um, this research really hit hard for me because it came at a time when another piece of research has been released by the fantastic Socially Mobile. They were supported by CIPR on their missing women study. And it found that 4,000, I mean, I think this is the first time we've had a number on it, but 4,000 women are missing from senior roles in our industry because they're either being sidelined or they're leaving the industry. And I guess that spoke to me because of the Women in PR mission. We're trying to get more women into senior roles and more diversity of women into senior roles in comms and PR, but yet, like the numbers are saying, we're just, they're falling out of the industry. And one of the other survey findings from our research was that, lots of women don't really see themselves staying in an agency post post 40. But they're also kind of worried about finding another role because of like age and gender. So they're kind of in this bind, they're trapped and that kind of fear factor is really coming through. I mean, you've been in PR for 3 decades now, Joe. Like what are you seeing? Have you experienced any of this? And what do we lose when we lose all these experienced women? I mean, 4,000, that's a lot.
Yeah, all those are all really brilliant questions. I mean, if I start from a kind of personal perspective, I remember being in agency when I was in my 20s. And I think I even said to my friends and my family, like, do not expect to see me being an agency in my 50s. I looked around the consumer PR world and there weren't many people, there weren't many role models, women in their 40s and 50s having what looked like thriving careers. And I really thought I was going to hit a ceiling. I didn't think I would be doing the job I'm doing now in either my 40s or my 50s. I think that's changed. I think there are more role models now. I think people are lifting as they rise and helping women get into those next roles. Because when I was growing up in the PR industry in the 90s, it was a slightly terrifying time that perhaps some of the more senior women in that industry had aped a lot of the behaviors that perhaps they felt you needed to have if you held any power. And they were generally a little bit more kind of male, perhaps stereotypically. So there's a lot of big hair, big shoulders, and a little bit of a lifting up the drawbridge, so that I guess a scarcity mindset. That's probably the best way of describing it. Whereas I think now there's much more of an abundance mindset. Like there is enough work, there should be enough work for everybody, right? And at every age, and we've all got something of value to bring to the table. But you're right, we are losing a lot if we lose these women. I mean, 4,000 is too many women to be casually, losing out of the industry. And I think what we lose is we lose mentorship. We lose experience, we lose empathy and understanding, and often institutional knowledge. These are women who have perhaps been in an industry 20, 25 years, who will know that business back to front. They'll know their clients. They would have spent a lot of time with those clients. And if we disregard them, we're really missing out, I think, on a whole um, number of benefits that women in their 40s and 50s bring to an organization.
Absolutely. And I think something that I've been reading while we've been doing this campaign is like women are trying to or women in this age bracket are trying to find another way because they aren't getting those roles within the kind of agencies or organizations that exist in our industry. So they're kind of having to carve out their own space. I think I read somewhere that the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are women in their 50s. And it's basically, well, if we're sick of waiting for someone to pick us, so we're going to pick ourselves. We're going to do our own thing, because that's the only way that we can make it work when we hit this stage of our lives. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think women are tremendously resilient, and actually that really jumped out for me out of the Socially Mobile Missing Women report. is how entrepreneurial women in their 40s and 50s tend to be, because they think, well, actually, this isn't working for me, so I'm going to create a world where I'm going to put myself bang in the center of it and I will make it work for me. And it definitely resonates. I mean, I started Hope&Glory with James Gordon McIntosh when I was 43. And I had a lot of experience to lean on. So I knew that I knew how to do it, if that makes sense. So that was reassuring. And I had the confidence to do it. But it has enabled me perhaps to stay in this industry for longer because I've created an environment which suits me and the team. And so you're right. I think women have had to start to rewrite the rules in their own way and in their own manner.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about what people like what organizations can do. And obviously you've got lots of insight into this running your own agency. Um, I often see organizations have lots of data or targets when it comes to other protected characteristics, so ethnicity or disability. But we don't really tend to see it around age. And I think one thing that stood out to me from our research is about only 11% of organizations um, have age-related DE&I targets. So, like, what's that about? Like, why is it such an overlooked part of this conversation? And what can we be doing differently in this space?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the fact that it's overlooked is mad. I mean, 11% is a really low number, right? So we need to, I think that's the first thing that an employer can do, and actually look around the table and look at, the age demographic of the people, in the executive leadership team or in the senior management team, and think, well, where are my people who are in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s? And if they're not there, why aren't they there? So I think that's the first thing. It's about setting a target and measuring it and being held accountable, like we are, like you said, with other things, other protected characteristics. I think it's really key. I think we need to look at the policies that we have, recognizing this is a life stage that we need to support. In the way that we would support perhaps women in their 20s and 30s who might be having children. Your children, your caregiving responsibilities don't end when, your child stops being a toddler. I mean, lots of friends of mine in the industry, we're now going through that stage where we've got adolescents, they're going through exams, it's A-level time. We still need time off, right? There's still caregiving to be done. And I think employers could be more generous around what they do in terms of parental leave. How do you help your older members of the team through this life stage? And the other area, from a health perspective, is around the menopause. I think it's no mistake, I guess, that women often have a lot of it's a symptom of the menopause, a loss of confidence. I mean, anxiety and a loss of confidence comes with perimenopause and menopause. So we need to help women through that, and whether that's giving them support, medical support, giving them time, but also being there and understanding that this is another hurdle that you work through in your 40s and your 50s.
Yeah, I think also like just normalizing that conversation around the menopause, it still feels like it's something that isn't talked about enough, right? People, I guess if you're going through it, you don't really want to maybe talk about it because you don't want people to like think about your ability differently. And in the same way, we probably don't talk about periods enough. Like people just feel a bit awkward about it. But I think just even surfacing that conversation before we even think about what practical support we can put in place is really important. We've got a menopause policy in our organization. I've learned loads about, the really small but like meaningful things that you can do just to make someone's life so much better. And I think that information is not just like powerful for the woman in question, but as a manager, as a colleague, to be just empathetic and supportive.
I completely agree. And I think women, yeah, we need to own that conversation. We need to be much more loud and vocal about what's happening. It's really, really important. And I think there's a double whammy here of menopause and age. And I think the reason why some women don't talk about the menopause is they don't want to out themselves in terms of how old they are. I remember writing an op-ed probably 3 or 4 years ago about the menopause. And in doing that, I had to admit I was a woman in her 50s. And I think we all float around pretending to be an age, like some indeterminate age of, anywhere between 40 and 60. And that's a shame, right? Because we're worried about discrimination and we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be.
The other thing that I think doesn't get talked about is some of the mental health kind of tie-ins to this. We've also done some research as a network into burnout, which another topic that hasn't really been talked about a lot, but is starting to. And I think that was extraordinary in terms of some of the headline stats from that. I think like two-thirds of women have considered leaving their job because of stress, because of burnout. And I just wanted to sort of talk about how that kind of cocktail, I guess, that heady cocktail between like ageism and mental health and burnout, how can we sort of tackle that? I mean, you talked about flexibility in working and thinking about all the things happening in a woman's life. Like, how does that play into the mix when we're talking about some of these other issues?
You're right. We need to look at every individual's journey, and I think that's a key takeout for me is that we tend to put women in a kind of box, and it's all women. But we all know that women are, each one of us is an individual. There'll be all sorts of things at play, our sexuality, our race, our ethnicity, our potentially our, we might be neurodivergent. We need to treat people as individuals and not put them into one box and think, well, all women have to behave like this or will behave like that. And I think for me, hearing people's own journeys and supporting them when it's most needed is probably something that employers can and should be doing more. I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of that intersectionality point. I think one of the things with this piece of work was already feeling there is a lack of visibility of women in colour in senior leadership roles, and then you throw age into the mix, you just think, gosh, like what fighting chance do I have sometimes? So that representation, I think, is really vital. To give women like you can only be what you see, right? But also to make sure that women don't feel expendable because of, an age or their race or sort of any point of difference. Um, what do you think the kind of younger generations must be thinking, who are coming up in through the industry? You talked about what it was like when you were in your 20s, but if you were a young person in PR right now, what would you think the messages that they would be hearing or seeing, and how can we change that?
I think the key thing is visibility. I mean, you touched on it, and actually, I'm loving the fact that as women in PR, we will be publishing a 40 over 40 power list because I think it's really important that if you are in your 20s, that you see women ahead of you on the journey ahead of you that you know you can learn from, and you know that they are still thriving and making things happen and being under really relevant in their 40s and 50s. And I think that's if I was a younger woman, that's what I would like to see. And I'd also like to think that those women will help me, like that they are going to lift me up. Because as I said earlier, there is so much opportunity in this industry. It's so vibrant. It's such a great place to work. And there shouldn't be an expiry date on experience. And I think I would love if I was in my 20s. Oh, to be in my 20s again. I would want to look up and think, "Oh, those women are really hustling and they're moving and they're doing interesting things. And I would want to be like that. So I think the visibility piece for me is critical and celebrating experience and bravery and courage of the women who are, you know, I guess ahead of us. At every point in our career, right, there's always women who are trailblazing, and we should celebrate that more.
Yes. Um, I remember Ginny, our vice president, wrote a brilliant piece recently about the scrap heap can do, and I think was the Ginny phrase, this idea that we've reached our sell by date when we hit a certain age. But in that piece, what I loved was she talked about the value of like mixed teams, and you talk about lifting others as we climb, but we have so much to learn from each other, right? I know in teams that I've worked from, it is looking at those women who are above and ahead of me, but learning from my peers, learning from people who have a completely different perspective on life, whether that's because of their lived experience, their backgrounds, their age, and that kind of skill sharing is really, really important. What are the other business benefits of kind of having those mixed teams? What should businesses be thinking about when they're thinking about this stuff? Because it's not just like the moral thing, right? It makes good business sense.
Completely makes good business sense. I mean, you come up with better ideas if you've got more perspectives and more brains on the topic. The insights will be deeper. Like you said, everybody will at it from the problem or the brief that we're trying to solve. They're going to come at it with their own personal experience, and you need age in that mix because it's a part of it. And how can you expect a 20 something to know what it might feel like to have aging parents or to, be worried about a particular health condition? You do need that mix. So I think it's a really rich and exciting place to be when you're in a team that's intergenerational. I think that's critical.
Um, We've got loads of great tips that we're going to be sharing as part of this campaign. We've been working with our sponsor, Elwood Outfield, Elwood Outfield, who are a recruitment agency, on some practical tips and advice that both employers and job seekers can consider when we're trying to tackle the issue of ageism. So hopefully we can support the issue through that toolkit. I'm really excited to see who makes the 40 over 40 power list. We've had a phenomenal response in terms of nominations. I think it's really struck a chord with so many women, and I'm excited to kind of see the advice and inspirational stories. But maybe let's close on that. For any woman who's listening, who's feeling this quiet crisis firsthand, what would you want her to know, Joe?
I want to know that experience really does not have an expiry date. You are not on the scrap heap at 40. We're all probably going to be working well into our 70s, I imagine. You're only getting going. You're just getting started. And to really own that energy, I mean, the great thing about being a certain age is that you care less, I think, about what people think. You can stay curious, you can be brave, and you're not going to tolerate it if people are behaving badly. I mean, you call it out, and I would say to women, call it out. Be that person. Be forthright. You've got everything to play for. It's a really exciting time.
I love that. I think that's a great inspirational message to end on. Thank you so much, Joe, for your time. And we'll be releasing the results from our 40 over 40 list next month.
Brilliant. Thank you, Angela. It's been a great conversation.